Liked Williams and Benetton. They were both blue, sort of, but my first hero in F1 was Mika Hakkinen. Back then, I suppose they didn't show us, or they didn't show us all of the radio exchanges and everything, but we still did get to hear some things. If you read through Niki Lauda's struggles when he was in the sport and even beyond in the sport, it shows you, even being an European and a white man, the kind of struggles he had to go through. So it's kind of universal. When F1 is all about drivers, it's always been, but I don't think it should be. It should be so much more
positivity. It's about new experiences.
It's a controversial topic, but I don't know how tomato and cheese and pineapple would go together. So no.
Good evening and welcome to a very special episode of George's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm here, your unusual co-host, F1 Blag, and today I've got a fantastic guest straight out of Team LH. So without any further ado, let me introduce to you Geetha Reghuraman. Geetha, how are you and how's it been going?
I am very well. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Yeah, you're giving away when we're recording this, and we were talking in the virtual green room that you've had a little bit of time off from work recently. Oops. Yeah, that's all right. How's it been going? What have you been up to?
Oh, it's been well. I've had a good break. It's going to be back to the grind, I suppose, next week, and I have to get my sleeping patterns back to some kind of a rhythm. So started working on that, but yeah, all good.
No, fantastic. Well, look, listen, we always do this at the beginning. The first question, and sorry, you might be having that jet lag of your sleeping patterns, but when you're on your best form and you're meeting people, how do you introduce Geetha Reghuraman? How do you say who you are and what you're about? Tell our listeners who you are.
Who I am? I always think that myself, if I have to introduce, then I would say I am by education an engineer, but by more of my own personality, I'm very much an introvert converted to an extrovert through education and work and so on. And I love most things in life, pretty much. I love reading, I love exploring and so on. So I would like to think that I'm pretty easy to get on with and a little bit of fun. Not too much.
Not too much. Well, we'll have exactly the right amount of fun. We'll engineer the amount of fun that we have today. But look, it was really interesting. You said an introvert converted to an extrovert. There was a Twitter post that said something like, when you're an introvert, but you're in a senior management role. And I really empathize with that. And it sounds like through your sort of professional life, you've gone that route as well. You mentioned engineer. I mean, am I guessing in the right tree? Sort of, is it the engineering that attracted you to Formula One? Tell us how you got into that, or how you got your interest in the sport.
I got interested. I love sports. I always have, even though I never actually played any sports. But my first love was cricket, because obviously my dad was very much into it. So it was kind of mandatory in the family. But we were all huge West Indies fans. I think back then, at least my father used to support, and there was... It was almost like a festival when there would be a match on. And then through myself, I think the sport I myself got into that nobody else in the family kind of watched was tennis. That was my first love. And then slowly into football and F1, purely by watching and learning more about it. If you watch something and it piques your interest, it takes you beyond the first couple of minutes, and then you start learning more about it. So, I think the first thing, not the engineering that attracted me, obviously the beautiful cars, they were just going round and round, but I just wanted to see what they were saying, and slowly through my own research and I got more into them, both football and Formula One.
No, fantastic. And before we talk more indeed football, which is my secret passion, although I support the wrong team, so I won't reveal that just yet. In terms of cricket, I think it does have that. There's always a familial link. I think my dad loved and still loves cricket, and I started watching it as a child a little bit as well. And I don't know if it's something, to do with the Commonwealth or something where it's most popular. My dad being from Nigeria, I don't think Nigeria has a strong cricket team, but certainly cricket was part of the culture. But do you remember, cricketing heroes from when you started watching? I'm definitely not trying to age you. But yeah, do you remember anyone that comes to mind when you think of it? Yeah.
Many. I mean, my dad's heroes were my heroes first, because he was such a huge fan. But I don't remember watching, his heroes. I'm sure I would have, but I don't distinctly recall them, in terms of Vivian Richards or Clive Lloyd and so on. But I do remember as a toddler, I must have seen them, but I don't really remember all that much. Although Vivian Richards I've seen through YouTube highlights and so on more, so I do remember them now. But as a young kid, I don't remember that. But I think my very first hero in cricket was Brian Lara. When he actually became much bigger hit a couple of years after I came to know about him and his first youthful innings. So there was a lot being spoken about him for his local team, and his first what do they call it, Youth World Cup cricket or whatever that was he was famous in back then. So I think Brian Lara was my first hero in cricket, and still is.
Yeah, and the fact that you knew him or knew of him before he really blew up and hit those huge centuries. Many people who are listening will be like, what are you talking about? But for those that don't know, right, when I was younger, if you wanted a rally game, you'd get Colin McRae Rally, right? So and people will know who Colin McRae is. If you wanted a cricket game, it was Brian Lara Cricket. And Brian Lara was the batsman. I think he's probably still the greatest batsman of all time. I don't know if there's any doubt.
The most stylish and elegant.
Yeah. Naturally gifted, but also I think worked extremely hard. And
he was very intelligent, Unfortunate thing is not a lot of people gave him a little bit more credit for it. If you see the way he paces his innings, I don't think there's anybody that does like him. Unfortunately, his team was rather, we all know what was around. So, but he had to pace his innings and manage that pressure so well. And he was immense.
I feel like, so I was joking with some people that also like Formula One, that I was going to change when, the W13 was extremely terrible. I was going to change my name from F1 Blag to Cricket Blag, but I didn't quite go through with it. But maybe if the W14 is terrible, we'll get there. And listen, those listening, if you've not heard of Brian Lara, or even if you have, just go on YouTube and type Brian Lara and just watch the second, third, whatever, the first hit that comes up. Watch that video. Incredible sports.
Brian Lara all over my walls. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I didn't think we were going to start with Brian Lara. That's brilliant. Okay, that's a brilliant start. So you mentioned Formula One and you talked about the beautiful cars. I often ask this question. Do you remember that first beautiful Formula One car that you saw? Do you remember the colours or vaguely, do you remember which car it was that you first saw and what season you got hooked, let's say?
I think I got properly hooked around, I want to say 97 or 96 season. But I first started watching, not every race maybe for the whole year, but around 94-ish, around that time. I didn't understand much, but I was trying to. And I would watch a few races a year here and there when I could over the weekend. And I think I really liked Williams and Benetton. They were both blue, sort of, but those were the two cars that really I would say I remember now, thinking back.
Yeah, I think we came into it at a similar era because I think many of us will remember that horrible day, even though I was a child, like 1st of May 1994, when unfortunately Ayrton Senna passed away, because it was on the news and it was big news. But yeah, like I think I probably started watching every race from about 1995, like without fail. And yeah, around that time, Williams, Renault, really at the front of the grid. Benetton had just, perhaps they had a big peak with Michael Schumacher.
There was a lot of buzz around them, isn't there? I mean, we learned pretty much everything from the way the commentators explained. So yeah, I was learning through whatever the lens was.
Yeah, before the internet, right? So it was Murray Walker. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're here today, and it's interesting because lots of people accuse those that follow Lewis Hamilton as being Drive to Survive fans, or, you know, you've only just got into the sport. But, you know, we've probably been watching Formula One almost as long before Lewis Hamilton as perhaps after, maybe just a little bit more now after. So did you have a favorite driver before 2007?
I did. I mean, I was my first hero in F1 was Mika Hakkinen. I started watching, I think, 97 onwards a little bit more seriously. And, you know, those were the Michael Schumacher Michael Schumacher was everywhere. So I had to obviously pick somebody else that was not Michael Schumacher. And, you know, the beautiful McLaren, obviously. My first hero was Mika, and the year after he won the championship, it was brilliant.
And that's interesting, because I think McLaren almost came out of nowhere. Like people don't remember that basically McLaren went off the boil in about, like, 1991, they won the championship. 92, the Williams just took over. And then there was a few seasons where McLaren had a Peugeot engine. It was terrible. McLaren built a car that was too small for Nigel Mansell, you know, so on and so forth. They took a while with that Mercedes engine. So like when Hakkinen won in 98, that wasn't a slam dunk. He joined the team and was in the team when it was
it was a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely.
You remember the West McLaren, was it called? It was a beautiful car.
Yeah, that was a great livery. That's up there, I think. And even though I was skeptical, right, because we had the Marlboro McLaren, which was similar to the Penske, the red and white, and that was a very classic livery that had been there for years. But yeah, the West was even better. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. As a whole outfit, you know, the team, the drivers and their suit, everything, you know, that 98 season for McLaren was a super hit.
So then, you know, there was a bit of a joke because Mika Hakkinen was going to take 1 year out. I think his last season in Formula One was 2001, something like that. So not that long after he'd won the championship in 99. He was really close in 2000 and relatively close in 2001. And then he said he was going to take a year out, and obviously didn't come back. What did you do in terms of your fandom from those Mika Hakkinen days all through that decade? Who were you watching, or what was your passion in that decade?
I think I still continued supporting McLaren, and then, you know, Kimi came along. You know, obviously the next Finn, and then driving for McLaren as well. So I was still a McLaren fan, a big Kimi fan. It was, you know, so unfortunate for him. Was it 2002 or 3 that he should have really won? He should have had 2. He could have had 2 titles with McLaren, but eventually at least should have had 1. But yeah, Kimi, and I remember when BMW came in, was it 2001 or 2? I used to like Montoya as well. So before Lewis, it was Kimi and Montoya. They were my 2 favorite drivers.
And I'm starting to see a pattern here, because you've basically described all of Michael Schumacher's rivals for that period from when you started.
Yes, to not just, you know, because they were Michael's, you know, rivals, but I liked the way they drove. They were aggressive, but with the right mixture of, I mean, they're qualifying. Brilliant. I love a brilliant qualifier. I mean, you could be, I don't want to irk any Alonso fans, but you know, you could be a brilliant driver, but there are moments you just know they're going to pull it out of the bag. I just thought that Montoya, I don't think he was supported very well. Obviously, I don't know everything behind the scenes, but yeah, Kimi and Montoya, definitely they should have done more. I mean, Kimi did win a championship, but I feel like they could have done more with their careers with probably better support.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time in Formula One, and whenever you look at any history or any sporting history, you kind of project the level of professionalism and structure that we have now back on that era. But even then, there was a kind of real gulf between, I don't know, the amount of testing that for other teams, or the kind of setup around different drivers and the amount of support they had. And certainly my view is that, looking at Williams, for example, with Frank Williams and Patrick Head, it was, let's say, a bit of an old-fashioned turn up, drive the car fast and go home structure. And maybe Juan Pablo Montoya would have done well with some more support, as you say. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well,
yeah, they did. I mean, at least reading about Williams and Patrick Head, it does seem like they did keep a lot of people in the dark. It was just them two making all the decisions, and the drivers were almost left out. It didn't feel like a very collaborative, spirit. Maybe that's how it was done back in those days. But yeah, it did feel like a little bit of collaboration between everybody else may have been better in terms of results. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that Juan Pablo Montoya and Kimi, of course, both huge talents, both natural and applied. And Montoya had come from Champ Car, it was called then, which is now, we know it as IndyCar, and had won the first season that he'd been in by a long way. So, a bit like the Jacques Villeneuve route, I think they expected him to turn up and win. And he did get a lot of pole positions, but that car, I think the first few years with BMW was not reliable. So, yeah.
He was definitely better than Ralph, for sure. But it always felt like, at least listening, without knowing the entire politics of F1 back then, it never felt like, even from the commentators talking about it, it was always first foot to Ferrari and then everybody else. So it was always an uphill battle for everybody else, but even more so with him being a Colombian and whatnot. So I think there was a lot of cultural differences, and probably also, the way they worked was different. Who knows?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about culture, and it might segue us on to Lewis Hamilton in a bit. But yeah, when you look at sort of, I don't know, we're not talking about ethnicity here, but if you look, Michael Andretti, who was a very successful driver in the US, both sides of his short run in Formula One, basically came over, had a really difficult time, and then went back and succeeded. And so in general, the paddock is well known for having quite a very conformist and kind of cliquey culture. And that's probably where we've seen in recent years some of that kind of, the FIA behavior probably seems absolutely normal within those people in the paddock. But anyone else, you're like, well, hang on a minute, that just seems completely unfair. So yeah, it's a really fascinating era to have gotten into.
It is. I mean, I suppose even for everybody needed to conform to something. It's just that if you're not a Western European, it was probably even more, shall we say. I mean, if you read through Niki Lauda's struggles when he was in the sport and even beyond in the sport, it shows you, even being an European and a white man, the kind of struggles he had to go through. So it's kind of universal, but it's even more, probably the gap is much bigger when it comes to a non-European, probably.
Yeah, and you know what? I've always thought about Formula One. That there's this weird mix, because you've got individual athletes, so the drivers, who have a huge amount of skill, and they do have a bearing on the results of a car. I mean, let's be polite to Valtteri Bottas, but if Lewis Hamilton hadn't been in the Mercedes in 2018 or 2019, then Mercedes could have been second or third in the constructors, and certainly wouldn't have won the championship. So, they do make a difference, but then equally there's this weird resentment where people want to be in the fastest car, absolutely. But then certain people, when they achieve, they either get blocked from getting into that car, or when they're in that car, their achievements are sort of denigrated or put down to the car. So, yeah, I agree. The culture can be quite resentful, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that happens pretty much in many sports as well. But at F1, it's just the number of people being so limited, I suppose, even more.
Well, look, this is quite a serious conversation, but let's pause that, because I have a few games that Den's always lets us play AMG Dens, who's the usual co-host of this show.
I told you, a little bit of fun, not too much.
A little bit of fun, not too much. Okay, no, I put you on edge now. There's not too much fun, I promise. So this game is called Taxi, Dinner and Avoid. So it's a very PG version of another game that we won't mention on our airwaves. So you have to pick.
Okay.
As we've been talking about this era, you can have Formula One drivers from any era, including today's era, and you have to pick one to drive you to dinner, presumably because of their driving prowess, one to have dinner with, presumably because they're a fascinating person, and then finally one to completely avoid. So Taxi, Dinner, Avoid. Any Formula One driver, who would you pick for each?
Ooh, taxi driver, definitely somebody who would be a good conversationalist. So maybe Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah.
Dinner with. Yeah. I think Kimi. He might probably loosen up and answer more of my questions. I don't know. I'm
you
not
sound
sure.
like you're
Maybe
going to interrogate him or something. Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of questions, obviously. Not the whole cookie cutter. Oh, what is your favorite color? Not that kind of thing. But whatever comes to my mind, if I'm at liberty to ask, and if they do answer, why not? So maybe Kimi. Avoid. I don't know. I would avoid anybody.
Well, you're being very diplomatic, but if a less diplomatic bone in your body does arise in this episode, you're more than welcome to suddenly
Max Verstappen.
Max Verstappen.
Definitely.
There we go. Right.
Definitely. The mood I'm in, definitely.
Okay. And we're slowly simmering and we're bringing it to the boil, and we'll talk about the current era in due course. But let me take the conversation off in a slightly different direction, because it strikes me that we're probably of a similar vintage and got into Formula One at a similar time. I also got into football at a similar time. I don't know about you. And when I was a child, even though I lived very close to Tottenham Hotspur, which is, for my sins, my team, probably the most common merchandise, the most sort of available merchandise you could get was Manchester United. They were the club of the 1990s. They're absolutely huge, massive. So I know that you're a big Man United fan. Yes. When did you get into them? What was the era? Who do you remember playing at that time?
Around the same time, actually, 94, 95. I didn't know much about Man United or any other team at all. It was actually my brother who wanted to watch. And he obviously needed somebody to watch with. Otherwise, the remote may be picked up by somebody else. He was too tiny. So I just gave him company so he could watch and learn as he was playing, I suppose. And, true to form, when I watch anything, I try to understand what's going on. And I think the very first game I remember properly watching, we were actually, time being secured. Oh, you need to be here. We need to watch this. Was a Man United Liverpool game. I can't remember if it was 94 or 95 or something like that. I didn't know that they were rivals. I didn't know anything. I was just sitting there watching, and it was an atrocious game, full of fouls and it was full-blooded. And I was outraged. I felt that Liverpool were the team that were fouling more and getting away with it. And obviously I wanted to side with the other team that were I wouldn't say they were not fully going into the tackles, but I felt that they were more nicer. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but the events of that game dictated that I started supporting them and starting to learn more about them. So it's really Liverpool's fault that I support United. Had they played better, maybe I would have supported them. Who knows? But yeah, that's how it started.
I remember that era because as a child, personally, I didn't really understand Liverpool because I was slightly too young to remember the era where they won everything all the time. But they had this weird entitlement that they were meant to be the winners, but they kept finishing sort of fourth or something in the Premier League. But yeah, Man United were the real successful team. Although that season that you mentioned, I think they lost both the league and the FA Cup final. But there we go. I'm not trying to rub it in because you've won a lot more than us. And so obviously you watched that match, and it kind of made you sympathise with Man United. Are there any sort of major memories, any sort of favourite things that you think about when you think about your time as a Man United supporter?
I only knew after I started to learn about who Man United is. In those days, internet used to have so limited information, just, one website that will have something, and videos will take forever to load and whatnot. So I only knew about the club, where they were, and so on, a little bit of the history about the Busby Babes and whatever else I could find. But on the team, I think my first hero, the only person I knew was David Beckham. But I think as I watched the games, he wasn't the one that grabbed my attention. It was actually Roy Keane. So I was a huge Roy Keane fan. I still am. I gutted how it ended with United for him. But Roy Keane was my favorite for the longest time. And it only feels like we've properly replaced him now with Casemiro. So it's been a huge gap, and has taken many years, hasn't it? So Roy Keane's, I love Roy Keane, how direct he is. He does have his own, quirks, I suppose. But my outstanding memory, I don't know if there's a game. I suppose I remember the losses much more, the kind of person that I am. But obviously, my memories are, I think, the Champions League games used to come on like 1:00 at night or something like that. And when I was in college and at the hostels, literally I would need to make sure that everybody was gone. Please leave the TV room because I need to watch a match. And people would be like, what are you going to watch? So obviously there'll be people that don't want me to watch the match, and they would be pretending to watch something else. So it was always difficult securing the TV room to myself so I can watch the games. Those are memories that come back. So any win in a Champions League was always precious because it was hard to watch. I remember the away goal losses much more than the wins. They were gutted, completely gutted. But, precisely now they took away their away goals. Typical. But I suppose 99, you would have to say, the biggest of them all, because it was so unexpected, obviously. And many more. I mean, as you say, we won a lot more. Still, the FA Cup final to Arsenal irksome most. I'm a different sort of person. I remember the losses much more than the wins. But yeah, we've had a lot more wins for sure.
Feels like we're getting an insight into your personality. First, your preference for Roy Keane, who's, for those that don't know, he was an incredible midfield player, and basically the heartbeat of the team, the captain, and also now a pundit. So someone that describes the action at halftime and at full time, and is incredibly direct when talking about the problems that he thinks are unacceptable. So that's the first thing we're learning. And then the second thing is about the losses staying with you, which sounds like, I don't know, is it something about constantly striving for improvement that both of those things have in common? What would you say? What would you say? Not to psychoanalyze you. Does that seem fair?
Not to. I think if it's for example, our losses to Barcelona, they were losses, no doubt about it. There's no way we could have won any of them. It wasn't. I don't remember them, or they don't sting me. But I feel like the ones where we should have won, could have won, if it not for this referee decision or that miss or something like that, is what stays with me a little bit more than outright losses. They happen. We didn't play well, or somebody else did, or something else happened. So that I like to think that I'm a fair person. So sometimes the other person just plays better than you. So you got to just say, okay, on that day it was a final, but we were crap. So our losses to Barcelona don't irk me as much because we were obviously second best.
No, absolutely, and I think there's something there about worrying about what you can control, and when you're beaten by just a sublime performance by another team, there's not much you can do. But yeah, for sure, If it's something that could have been within your grasp and you let it slip, that probably does sting more, as you say.
Yeah, and with Roy Keane, obviously, his performance, I can't remember. I mean, obviously, I'm biased, but I don't know any player who actually performs 9 out of 10 most games, and some games out of this world, but most games just controlling everything. I mean, I know that people say Brian Robson used to do it. I don't remember. Obviously, I hadn't seen him. But I don't know that anybody does it like him. Maybe, I mean, I know Arsenal fans would say Vieira. I don't know that he was as good. Obviously, I'm biased. So I since Roy Keane or before, I don't know. From everybody I have seen, I don't think I've seen consistency and perfection as much as Roy Keane has shown us.
No, well, I mean, clearly there's a way of winning people over, and with Roy Keane, I would say there are some people that love him, and then other people that find him to be too abrasive. But one thing you can't deny is his results on the pitch and the way he led that.
Yeah, he did what was necessary. He wasn't flashy. He always put the team before. I mean, obviously people like goal scorers and so on. I mean, I'm talking purely from what he needed to do and how well he did it. And if he wasn't there, how different the team was. He really was the engine of the team.
So let's segue, because this is really interesting. Let's segue back to Formula One and let's talk about roughly the present day. Because when you describe about people doing what they need to do to win, I don't necessarily think of Lewis Hamilton, or notwithstanding the fact he's pulled out some incredible performances. But certainly he is, I would say, without a doubt, if you look at all the drivers up there with like 3 or more world championships, Lewis Hamilton is the cleanest. There's no doubt. No one can show me any numbers. Maybe Niki Lauda because of the era that it was in. But, Lewis Hamilton maybe doesn't fit that description as well as, I don't know, Max Verstappen. So tell me, not to provoke you too much, but what was it that drew you to Lewis Hamilton? Was it when he entered the sport? Was it something that grew over time? How did you become a member of Team LH?
I think obviously this was before a lot of internet. So when people were talking about who was going to come into McLaren the next year, there were a few candidates, and I heard about the rumors of test driving, who had the fastest time and so on. There were, talks about him coming in, and, people were talking about potential future world champion and so on. So all of this was news filtering in, I suppose, as it happened in Britain. We got to know a lot, a little later, I suppose. But I was keeping, I was just reading news and so on. And I only started watching him after he joined McLaren. But Kimi left and he moved to Ferrari. And me supporting a Ferrari driver? No way. So obviously, I was still a McLaren fan, and I started supporting Lewis.
Yeah, and I can see that. I can see there's a correlation here. You talked about Kimi, or prior to that, Mika, Kimi, Juan Pablo, and then Lewis Hamilton. But of course, he's no longer a McLaren driver. I remember many people saying when he made that switch after the 2012 season, God, he's throwing his career away for money. And I think there was a Christmas card by Bernie Ecclestone. I don't know why he did that implied that Lewis was just after the money. Of course, he's proved everyone wrong and become the most successful driver of all time. So today, is there anything like, how would you describe your admiration for Lewis Hamilton? Is it around the driving? Is it around off track? Is it both? How do you sort of describe it?
I think with Lewis, when he came in, I am somebody who tunes in for the race and quali first. I love quali. Quali is my most, the format I love the most. And then quali in the race, and that's it. Those 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever of the race, and that's that's me out. And then if there's any news which is that big that it's filtering to me through my just perusing normal news, then I would know about it. Right back then, we didn't have internet and Twitter and news spreading through, no matter how important or unimportant it is. not, it wasn't that way. So my, 20 years ago, whatever, my interest was just during the weekend. I would watch, games, and then that's it. I would tune out. So, but I do remember with Lewis, what grabbed my attention, or what stays with me, is how fast he was. He was incredibly fast, and how much he wanted to win. If you listen to his, back then I suppose they didn't show us, or they didn't show us all of the radio exchanges and everything, but we still did get to hear some things. And he was such a keen young man to win. That's all he was looking at. You could see that, from everything he said and the way he drove. He wanted to maximize his results. So I love that, to do the best you possibly can in a given day, and to maximize what you can get out of the day. I'm all about that. So I loved Lewis for that. Obviously, his driving, he was amazingly fast. And he did have some, controversies back in the day, didn't he? He put some, stuff on Twitter about his some metrics or something. I can't remember what he put out. Maybe it was the telemetry or something. But I wasn't keeping up. I wasn't keeping up that much back in those days about it. So it was all about what they did over the weekend, and I would tune off. So yeah, Lewis was everything a driver could be. I don't know what your question was. I meandered somewhere else. But yeah.
Describing your admiration, and that's really interesting. He's always been a great qualifier, and in recent years that's been less apparent. But I'm convinced that basically, because he wants to win, he sets the car up for Sunday, and he's so good that he can, basically lean the car towards race trim, and still compete, which then gives him a ridiculous advantage in terms of tyre preservation, in terms of race pace on a Sunday. And you can see the comparator where, with Valtteri Bottas, sometimes Bottas might get him in qualifying. It would be quite close. But that's because Lewis was basically trying to get as close to Bottas as possible. And then, therefore, he'd get the maximum benefit on a Sunday. I don't know if you think that. And yeah, his intelligence is what really does it for me.
And I think that's more, he's evolved into that now. If you go back to his McLaren days, or even, before 2010, he was... The other thing I should say about Lewis was, I really like to see sports, men and women say what they think at the time, and those who are expressive, and those that are able to explain, either the jubilation or the disappointment or whatever the case may be, rather than like a cut paste answer. I'm looking forward to this, or blah, blah, blah. You guys have been great. Okay, we've heard it like a million times. So the thing that I would say about Lewis was always how well he would speak, but explain what his rationale was. Nobody, I don't know if you think, not a lot of people would go into detail. Maybe Michael Schumacher and Mika might back in the day. When they explain things, not a lot of people would explain what they were thinking, Lewis was very candid. He's not as much now. But Lewis, when he started, even, pre-Mercedes and also first few years, he was very candid in explaining his thoughts about the strategy or his setup or what he wants to do. Even when on a Saturday or something before the race, when they asked him what his plan was, he would be very candid as much as he can. So I quite like that in a person, to say, to be able to explain, because as a viewer, not everybody gets to research everything. So the 3-4 hours we spend on a race weekend, learning as much as you can what they're thinking is really precious, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate the candor, and you mentioned he's sort of slightly less in that way, maybe in a sporting way, less like that nowadays. He's been outspoken on political and sort of human rights issues. I wonder if it's because of the experience, particularly with social media. He does attract a lot of hate, and a lot of criticism, which may have, blunted his desire to be as forthright when it comes to the sport in particular. I don't know if that's just a theory of mine.
No, it's definitely true. The way the world is, anything you say or don't say or how you look, how you speak, the tone of your voice, anything about you, some people like them, some people don't like them, some people hate them. There's just so much extremes, and I don't suppose it's just now. It's probably always existed. We probably know more about it now that with social media, and we see more and more comments. We never used to speak to as many people as we do now, do we? I mean, back in the days it was just telephone and whatever. So I was watching Adelaide tennis tournaments yesterday a little bit, and if you see the comments on the side or what people are talking about, people are just talking about, how this person looks or how flat XYZ is or whatever. So you can get hated for anything. So I'm not, I don't read about that a lot. It's just a pure waste of time. People might like the way he looks. Some people may not like the way he looks. People might like the way he sounds, does not like it. So it's just very irrational, I find. You should be allowed to, his life, his background, his parents, is everything about his life decides what kind of person he is. Who am I to say that, whether it's palatable to my sensibilities or not? Right? Everybody is different. I just think that a basic respect for a person sometimes goes missing, especially if you're a popular person. People seem to think that you can say whatever you want. So, there's a limit, of course, but yeah, sometimes it just goes way past that. So a lot of Lewis hatred is probably about how he looks or what he wears or what he says or whatever it may be. Some people just don't like him.
Yeah, the thing about it, and I don't want to dwell on this point, but the beautiful thing that I've observed about Lewis Hamilton is how he turns things into positive energy, and how he, at least talks about, if you look at his Twitter bio, which sounds like a really small thing, it's about personal growth, it's about sort of positivity, it's about new experiences. And I've not really ever seen him, respond negatively. Maybe he did one, that's why they jump on him when he did a little baseball cap to my biggest fan or something to Alonso. People took that because he doesn't do too much in a bad way. They took that as the most negative thing he's ever done.
He can't do too much, can he? When he was outspoken, that was all. See, the thing with Lewis is whatever he does, because he's box office, whatever he does, the entire weekend, he's going to get asked for days on end about it and being written. So I think Lewis has evolved very much into the person he is because of his circumstances and the kind of media attention he receives. So, and his personal growth, we have to credit him for how much he has learned and how much, people don't change all that much. It's just the way you project yourself to the world might change. So I'm pretty sure he still feels, remember back in the days when he used to talk about how negative he would feel after a race, he would lock himself in a room or not do press. He would find it difficult to do press. I like that about a sports person. Losses are hard. We can't expect somebody who has just lost an unbelievable match to just come out and say, of course, they should congratulate the opponent and say, well done, this is very hard, blah, 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 a couple of lines. Yeah. But I think nowadays, it just goes way much than that. And we need to give them, sports people, respect that it's incredibly hard. They work sometimes the entire year for that. And it's taken far too lightly for me. And Lewis has evolved into the person that he is. And I very much respect that, especially I love Lewis, but my respect for him has grown immensely after the way he dealt Abu Dhabi, the way he's come back, and to have that car, but still, I'm sure he felt negative many times, but he still tried to dig it out and do the best he could. And with everybody trying to kind of, speak down and say, this is, the statistics obviously did not help. But imagine if he had a few more retirements or if he made a couple of more errors. Can you imagine what the headlines would have been like? People are still waiting to take him down. So it's incredible pressure. I don't think we can appreciate the kind of pressure a sports person is under, each of them. So I respect him more after last year, the way he stayed humble He's tried to stay positive. Of course, he would feel negative. It's only natural, given the state of the car. But I respect him more for how he's handled himself last year than ever before. He's what you would call a role model after what he did last year.
No, I agree, because there's a couple of things. One, Abu Dhabi 2021, he'd put together perhaps the greatest ever run, I would say, in Formula One history. So by that I mean, you start, I think it was Mexico Grand Prix. Basically, they qualified well, and then they didn't win the race. They just didn't have the pace, that high altitude, and so on. And it looked like the title was over. And then he said, "It's not over. It's not over."
Yeah.
And then he went Brazil. We don't even need to go through that, but he was basically 25th on the grid and won the race, even though when he was overtaking for the lead, he got driven to the airport off the track. He did Qatar the first time there, and he qualified by, a decent margin and just drove off into the distance. Then he did Saudi Arabia, in spite of being brake checked, in spite of all those restarts where all of a sudden he was being overtaken off track, or, and then he got to Abu Dhabi. So I'm saying all these points, because then if you're cheated in the last second of the last hour of, all that effort, and then for him to stand on the podium and then give only positive interviews immediately in the aftermath of that for me is strength. That is unbelievable strength. And that's a role model, as you say.
Absolutely. And not just what he did that day and how he came back after a brief absence. It takes immense strength to get out of that space of, say, why has this happened to me? Or, or a hatred of things that, why did people do this to me? And beyond that, to come back and say, this is not how I want to finish, or whatever his inner, talkings were. I'm sure his family helped Anthony and everybody else, but it's still, as much as you have help from everywhere else, it is your own inner strength it takes to actually say, no, I want to come back. I want to keep doing this. I don't want to feel self-pity. And to come back with that car, and for the whole year, not to blame the team or just keep working at it, the lack of entitlement he showed, that it feels when he got up, he's like, oh, this feels like a first win. I'm so happy today after this. It's just third, but it feels happy. What kind of a 7-time world champion do you think would say such things? Can you imagine anybody else, not dissing other people, saying, oh, take the Ronaldo interview. I'm entitled. I am this. I am this. Everybody just thinks that I have the talent and everybody else should be supporting me. But here's Lewis with so much, background that's happened. And he came back, and with that car, he did not blame anyone. He just said, all right, I'm getting back to work. I'm doing the best I can. We need to bring this car to a much better position. And he was all about that. And I think that is what a role model is. And he's been beyond a role model. I mean, this is beyond what anybody could have expected of him. So it's just, I cannot speak highly about how much he's been a tower of strength since Abu Dhabi.
No,
and to be honest with you, I did not think that he would get as close to Max Verstappen in terms of points with consecutive wins last year as he did. Year before, 2021. I thought it was out of the question. I thought he might get close, but it may still be like 10, 15 points. I did not think he would win like he did. That was, if Hollywood even made a movie, it would not come close. So, but it was just I still kept thinking after the race, he was numb. Like, this is not right. This is plain cheating. I thought they will reverse the decision. It will change. The stewards will change. As the night went on, I really could not believe. It was like an alternate universe where illegal things were law. I still can't believe it. They have massively. There are no words to explain. I'm still not over it. So I can imagine when I say I'm not over it, because I like to see fairness win, and it was not fair. It was not legal. And to think that everybody for whatever reason, they did not even explain the reason. And I don't agree with that human error. Oh yeah, Michael Massey could not count how many. Yes, he was counting with his fingers, was he? And he had only 4 fingers in his hands. I just don't agree with that. That was cheating, whatever the names we can think of. It was everything and more, and it should have never happened. And for people to actually say, oh, if only they made a pit stop, blah, 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 it's just unbelievable. It shows the worst of humanity for me.
No, I mean, I've learned over my years to become a more charitable and a nicer, kinder person. But a mantra that I heard in my early 20s that stuck with me for a long time is you can't reason with stupidity. So if anyone ever says, oh, why didn't they do a pit stop? Literally just never talk to them again. There's no point.
Mute.
unless they're your family, in which case you might have to talk to them. But anyway, that's a different point. But look, I think
you can see how much it still gets me angry. I'm still not. They need to go back. Even if it takes 10 years, they need to reverse that decision. It was not right.
Yeah, they do. For me, it's one of those things. I think it's politics. I think what's really interesting, and we saw some of this season or the last season just gone, 2022, there are 2 big power bases in Formula One, right? Or let's say 3, including the teams. But the 2 big ones are Liberty Media, that are the commercial guys, and then the FIA, that are the people that administrate the sport. And clearly in 2021, Liberty Media wanted to build new stars. Why? Because if you look at their world champions on the grid, you had Kimi, who's now retired. You had Alonso, who had gone and come back, but was 40. You had Vettel, who's now retired. And then you had Lewis, who, people try and make him retire all the time. So they needed a new star. They need to create that star power because that's what they want to do. And then clearly the FIA, whatever reason, they decided to do what they did in that final race and ratify the decision. And it was, for me, ridiculous. You're starting to see, for me, in 2022, that those 2 big poles, those power bases are starting to move apart. So the FIA remains incompetent and to some extent negligent, whatever you want to call it. But Formula One or Liberty Media is starting to see how that incompetence is eroding their sports credibility and I would say the financial viability of their plan to grow the audience. So, it will be interesting over the coming couple of years if the FIA continues to be what it is, and if Formula One and Liberty Media get sick of it, where that goes. I don't know if you observe something similar, or I just hope there's a way out of this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a lot of problems actually eventually creeps up into sports because they try to manufacture something. People, at least I think so, people that watch sports you could broadly say there are people that don't really know much about it, but they just want to support somebody winning and just, boast about it. That's one kind of fans we can just ignore. They're just in for it, for the, thrill and whatever else. But sports no matter what sport or what kind of person you support and, whatever that may be, I like to think that, people who follow sports and watch, especially live, is because they want to see a kind of a game based on rules and then decide, okay, this person won, or whatever the may be. We watch it for, because we like the game, we like the rules. There are things everybody would like to change here and there, but most of the time it works, right? And that's why we watch it. And whether you win or that's what a sport, and when you say Liberty Media, FIA, the sport should do more about what it's doing well and where it failed and what can it do to improve. So it needs to follow a very constructive pattern in order to show people that this is what they're trying to do. It's not just about one person or one, which is why when F1 is all about drivers, it's always been, but I don't think it should be. It should be so much more. So many other people should get a little bit more publicity as well. Now it's just about one team principal here or there, or just F1 drivers. I just think that it could be so much more. But at the end of the day, people would like to see a fair result based on the rules. If you want to change the rules, do it for next year, right? But when you play a game for a year, you follow it to the regulations they were written against. When you do that, and if there are honest mistakes, and if the rules allow you to change something, you should. And if they don't, then go say, okay, too bad, we couldn't change it. Next year we will. No matter how grave the error was. Had they done it even for Abu Dhabi, let's just say, hypothetically, let's just say, oh, there was no way, he made a human error, whatever the error may be, but there was no way we can take it back now beyond a certain time, where we should have, with the stewards should have, or whatever the case may be. Now you can't potentially unlap the last ride, whatever the case may be. Just explain why you are. I may still disagree with you, but at least you gave us your reasoning, and there's a full stop at the end. It closes there. The official governing body says, this is what it is. I am sorry, Lewis, you were robbed, or whatever the case may be. I'm just saying that not everybody might agree, but there needs to be an accountability for each sport. But when you try to manufacture things, or when you say, oh, Lewis might be leaving, so we need to have another person, when you manufacture things, it never ends well. And it just needs to, people like who they like because of what's happening around them. So I'm not a huge fan of manufacturing things. I would rather these people, Liberty Media and FIA did not, bring themselves into making these key decisions. Just follow the rules and create something for the future. Don't meddle with what's happening now.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the reason many of us watch sport is to see to see the thrill of the competition, right? It's high pressure, high stakes, high talent, and you have that level playing field on which you watch those gladiators, whatever the sport is, compete. If it's football, if it's tennis, cricket, we've talked about Formula One, and you're right. When that playing field is altered or no longer level, or things change at the very last minute, essentially the satisfaction you get from sport is gone, because you wanted to see those gladiators go at it, those people go at it, and see who on merit was going to win. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
So look, let me ask you a couple of questions as we come towards the end of this episode. It's been a real pleasure, Geetha, to have you with us. We've talked a lot in the past, your way into the sport, into Formula One and others, the scandal, let's call it the scandal, the robbery of 2021.
Yes.
The arduous struggle of 2022, the pride and the effort, and carrying that car so that his teammate could get pole and win a race. So now let's look at 2023. What are your hopes and aspirations for the sport, the competition, but also Lewis and the Mercedes team?
I think, the sport is just going to be more of the same. I don't see many changes at all. Sky Sports is just going to be as they are. They're not going to think that they are a global broadcaster. They're just going to think they're a British broadcaster. I don't see, there's so much more they could do in terms of explaining to the fans about what's happening during a match or before the strategy calls and so on. But it's always about the drivers and, tiny tidbits here and there. I just see that, it's just going to be more of the same. With Mercedes, I'm sure they'll make improvements. I'm not sure that it's going to be, whether there's enough to bridge the 10 months they potentially lost in terms of car development to Red Bull, unless, Red Bull may decide to have done something and which didn't work for them. So it may be close, but if W14 is as close in performance to RB19 at the start of the season, I think that will be a job well done for the Mercedes team. For Lewis, of course, the title is the main thing. Nothing less will do, but I think it's going to be a tall order. I am hopeful if the car is good, of course he can pull it out, but they're starting a couple of steps from behind. But I think they should succeed. They should successfully get past the Ferrari for sure. Whether it's going to be the top spot, I don't know. I hope so, but we shall see.
Assessment, like we could be twins here. I think that's probably my level of ambition. Obviously my level of ambition is higher, but my realistic view of the 2023 season. But let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's touch wood.
Yes.
And let's hope we get there. So, before we go, two questions. The first one, linked to that one. Do you have any sort of New Year's resolutions? We're recording this on the 5th of January. I'm not sure when it will come out, maybe next week. But any New Year's resolutions or any sort of mantras or things that you're holding with you as you enter the new year?
I usually don't sort of make resolutions or anything like that. But I guess, I mean, we touched on earlier, isn't it? Getting my sleeping pattern in order is a huge task ahead of me. So if I manage that, I mean, all my life, I think ever since you enter college, your sleeping pattern goes for a toss, doesn't it? So I've been struggling with that. So I think if I manage to sort of get it in some shape, I would be happy with 2023.
Not a resolution. We don't do resolutions, as you say, but like an aspiration. And I'm terrible for having my phone when I go to bed and I'll just listen to this one more thing. Or what time is it? I'll just check my
Why
phone.
not? Do it.
Yeah, but you know what? Well, so long as it's Stripping the Dipping podcast, yes, you listen to that one more thing and you get right the way to the end, and then you give it a like on YouTube and you subscribe. But I think having our phones near us at sort of 5 a.m. is probably not good for sleep. But there we are. Let's see.
Yeah, my mantra in life is do whatever you want at the time, right? Regrets is always the problem. When you're looking at something, you're like, oh, I could have been doing this, or maybe I shouldn't be doing this. I should sleep more. No, do what you want, and it's fine.
But remember, don't have too much fun. Just have the right amount of fun, as we discovered.
Oh, if you're capable of having too much fun, please do, by all means. I'm patently not capable because you probably gathered by talking to me.
No. Well, I've really enjoyed this. There's a final question that we ask all of our guests. It's the most important philosophical question that we have to ask, which is, let's say you're consuming a pizza, which I'll assume you have done at some point in your existence on this planet. Would it be acceptable to have pineapple on the pizza or no pineapple on the pizza? Over to you.
No pineapple. I don't think I've ever had a pineapple pizza. So I know it's a controversial topic, but I don't know how tomato and cheese and pineapple would go together. So no.
Good. One more for the good guys.
Pineapple is lovely as it is. Just consume the fruit.
That's good. Georgie loves the people that say pineapple on pizza is good. So by extension, I love the people that say it's bad. So on my team, we've got you, we've got Miles Rowe, we've got Mario Andretti, we've got many people. I don't know. What side did Den say he was on, Georgie? I can't remember.
He's playing diplomacy on that part.
Ooh, okay. I've not revealed my preference, but I'm talking about the list of people. So there we go. I think, was it Ben Hunt said banana on pizza? I can't remember now.
Yeah,
what?
Banana on pizza. Yeah, we went with that as well. Yeah, we also were like,
that is a crime. What? That should be declared a crime.
He took it in another direction, but no, that was a good conversation. Well, look,
like Toto would say, I think it was Toto that told Ben Hunt when he asked him some stupid question. He was like, "Are you serious asking me this?" I seriously have to say, is he serious about banana pizza? No.
Gosh, well, that 2 degrees of separation. Us, Ben Hunt, Toto Wolff. We're more or less the same family. Of course. Apart from the bananas on pizzas, of course, we stand in solidarity with those that have witnessed such a crime. Look, Geetha, it's been so fantastic to have you on the show. Is there anything else, any final message you want to leave? And also, where can people check out? Because I can see you're on Twitter. Are you on Instagram as well? Where can people check you out online?
I am, but I'm not that active. I'm Twitter probably more. I usually stay away from controversies or nonsenses. It just takes too much of your time. So I like to use my time more productively. Then sometimes you do get carried away, but Twitter, I suppose, is where I am.
Okay, and I can see that it's Gee, G-E-E, and then Reg, R-E-G-H, all one word, and that's your Twitter handle. So now I want to see hundreds of people go and follow Geetha on Twitter. And then you'll have to be more active. And you'll have to explain to people who MUFC are and, who the Glazers are. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Now it is terrible, but there we go.
Okay. Well, look, thank you for your time. What a fantastic episode this has been. Before we go, please do go onto our YouTube channel. We're giving it a real push this month. We've got some classics from our first season. We've already uploaded clips from our episodes with Taylor Ferns, our episode with Ben Hunt, talking about the travesty, the scandal that was Abu Dhabi, and of course, the thing that I mention all the time, a clip from our episode with Mario Andretti. I'm not going to say it was a coincidence, but we posted that, and then the following day, F1 talked about how teams can join Formula One, and then the following day, Andretti announced their pursuit of joining the sport with Cadillac. So what can I say? Our YouTube channel is where it's at if you want to get the scoops for the future of Formula One. But with no further ado, it's been fantastic to have you here, Geetha. Thank you so much. I've been F1 Blag. This has been another episode in the vault for Georgie Stripping the Dipping. Good night.